my name is Yue Hua, and I work at the RISE program, which stands for Research on Improving Systems of Education. And I'm here to tell you all about research in progress that I'm working on with Lant Pritchett. And we call it Choose and Curate toward Commitment to Capable and Committed Teachers, or the 5 Cs. So the year before I became a teacher in my home country, which is Malaysia, the Education Ministry launched a blueprint that laid out some aspirations for our education system and some actions for achieving those aspirations. And one of those actions was to develop a new teacher evaluation instrument with the intention that this new evaluation instrument would help to prioritize a teacher's primary role in helping students learn. But in practice, what this new evaluation instrument meant was that I filled in an Excel spreadsheet and then I printed it out along with several other pieces of paperwork, and I put all of it in a nice new file. And then I added the file to the other bits of paper on and around and under my desk. And as you can guess, this new evaluation instrument didn't really change anything about my primary role in helping students learn. And one of the biggest reasons why these changes were just on the surface was because the policy expected that we would reorient our daily priorities toward the goals of the evaluation instrument. But we already had so many reports and files and forms, so having just one more didn't change much. So here's another example of a gap that I encountered between policy expectations and on-the-ground realities. Now, I was teaching English, which is a second or third or fourth language for most Malaysians. And this is a self-study online resource that the ministry provided for upper secondary school students who wanted to strengthen their English skills. But many of my upper secondary school students failed to write grammatically correct sentences and really struggled with it. So as you all know, this gap between expectations and reality really isn't limited to the classrooms that I happen to teach in. Like how more than half of all 10-year-old children across all low and middle income countries can't read a symbol text. And the overwhelming majority of those children who can't read are actually attending school. That's the large slice on the left. But a lot of policy reforms, even pre-COVID, focused on improving access to school, which would only help the little purple slice at the bottom, or on TVET, which would only benefit children who can already read and count. So it's as if a lot of policy decisions are made with the assumption that the problem looks a certain way, when in reality, the problem is much bigger and scarier and more complex. Like how policies for teaching quality sometimes focus on more in-service training when a bigger problem is that 80% of sixth grade teachers can't pass a sixth grade math test. Or when policies focus on giving teachers a salary bonus to improve their motivation. But the bigger problem is that teaching is seen as a way to get a steady salary or as a job for graduates who can't be lawyers or engineers, rather than as a mission-driven profession in its own right. So the key point here is that these problems are challenging because teachers are embedded in many different environments. So they're part of a system involving lots of different people and resources and organizations and relationships and goals. And if we want to fix these problems, we need to think about the interactions between all of these different parts of the system. Because when you have a complex system with many different interacting parts, then changing just one of those parts might not have much effect on the rest of the system, which is why piecemeal solutions like introducing a new in-service training module or a new evaluation instrument, like what I experienced, these solutions often just change things on the surface, but they might not have any deep effect on teaching and learning in the classroom. So what we try to do differently with this research project is to go beyond specific interventions or policies and to focus instead on some of these complex and systemic interactions in teacher careers. And we propose a set of principles that encapsulate some of these interactions with the goal of improving teacher careers to cultivate student learning. And we call these principles the 5 Cs. But before we get into the 5 Cs, there's another important challenge I'd like to talk about. And here's the challenge. When it comes to teacher careers, it isn't just the policymakers who face a gap between expectations and reality, but it's also the novice teachers themselves when they're first entering the profession. Let me give you an example. So before I started classroom teaching, I knew that I could effectively tutor individuals in small groups and that I could talk or lecture to large groups of quiet listeners. But once I became a teacher, I quickly found out that it was really, really hard for me to teach groups of 30 to 45 distracted, frustrated teenagers. I tried lots of different classroom management strategies, but none of them really worked. My students really liked me, which was good, but they didn't necessarily listen to me, which was really bad for their learning. And it wasn't emotionally sustainable for me either. But I didn't know any of that until I'd actually spent some time in the classroom. Which brings me to the first two of the 5 C's, and these two are choose and curate. What we mean by this is that it's not enough for education ministries and schools to carefully choose novice teachers based on qualifications and interviews and sample teaching lessons. Because if we really believe that classroom teaching is complex and it's a craft with many interacting elements, this means that no one, not even the teachers themselves, can know with 100% certainty how good they'll be at classroom teaching and how motivated they'll be to continue doing it long term until they actually spend some time in the classroom. Like how I had no clue that I would find classroom discipline so overwhelmingly difficult. And we call this trial novice period of classroom practice the curate period. And in practice, the 5 C's look very different from the typical approach. So in a typical civil service approach to the teaching profession, teachers might have a nominal probation period. So a very small number of really obviously irresponsible teachers might not complete their probation, but everyone else gets hired long term. And of course, a small number might also quit along the way. But on the whole, the number of teachers in each cohort is very stable until retirement because it's a secure job. And in contrast, under a 5 C's approach, we would expect to see quite a lot of teachers leave the profession during the novice phase. Ideally, this would happen voluntarily because the profession will have high internal standards, and those who realize that they can't or don't want to meet those standards will choose to go to another field. Now, it's important to note that under the 5 C's principles that we're proposing, the curation period should also involve really extensive investment in developing both teachers' technical capabilities and also their socialization and induction into the shared goals of the profession. Like how in museums, curation just doesn't mean selecting the most suitable artworks and artifacts for exhibitions, but it also means taking care of all the pieces in the museum's collection so that they're all at their best. And it's also important to note that the curation period is temporary. So after teachers have demonstrated that they're capable and committed, the education system should make a commitment to hiring them long-term. So in terms of complex systemic interactions, one thing we're looking at here is interactions between different phases of teacher careers. What you do in the pre-service and novice phases can set norms that affect teacher practice for the whole duration of teachers' careers. And another set of interactions that's at work here is the fact that motivation for teachers and for other humans is made up of many interacting components. And some teacher career reforms that focus on raising salaries without considering other aspects, these imply that teachers are mostly motivated by money or by their material quality of life. But we've seen policies that raise or even double teacher salaries nationwide, but didn't improve student learning at all. But once you factor in other sources of motivation, then it becomes clear that in many low-performing education systems, the main limitation on teacher motivation isn't their salaries, but how satisfied and validated they feel professionally. So an approach with an initial period to train and socialize teachers into the profession, and then where those who have proved themselves in the classroom are rewarded with a stable and respected career, is really crucial for restoring and sustaining the motivation of teachers individually and the teaching profession collectively. So 2 final points to note. First, the 5 C's of teacher careers are a set of principles which should be applied and practiced differently in different contexts, because another key lesson from systems thinking is that context is really fundamentally important. And second, it's clear that the 5 C's can be expensive. So investing heavily in training and induction, especially when a lot of the people you train won't be in the system permanently, that's costly. But we could argue that it's also tremendously costly in a different way to pay the salaries of a stable teaching corps where there isn't any clear sense of purpose to distinguish the profession from any other civil service job, and when many children aren't learning. So the bottom line here is, what is your overarching priority? Do you want to pay a premium so that teaching can be a stable civil service job? Or do you want to pay a premium to attract, equip, retain, and motivate teachers who are both technically capable and motivationally committed to the goal of student learning? With that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions.